Good afternoon. Today's lecture is about different languages spoken in United States. The Modern Language Association has put together data on the number of speakers and locations of 30 most commonly spoken languages in United States. Let me first explain how the information was gathered. The data came from U.S. Census information. In addition to the user census questions about number of family members and age, people were asked about language. If a language other than English was spoken at home, if the answer was yes, then the person were asked to name the language. You might be surprised at how many different languages were reported. 300. Yes, 300 different languages are spoken in the United States. The Modern Language Association focuses on the 30 most common languages. Of course, English is number one language, Spanish is the second most common, Chinese is third, and French is fourth. Now, the Modern Language Association has put all this information together in different ways. So, for example, if you can look up a particular language, let's say Korean, and see how many speakers there are throughout the United States, there are almost 900,000 Korean speakers in the United States. Then you can see how that compares to the total number of speakers of languages other than English. So of the people who speak another language, 2% are Korean speakers. It's also possible to see how many Korean speakers there are in different areas. Two main areas of concentration are Southern California and Washington State. Now, another way you can look at the information is by starting the place with the entire United States, a state, a country, or a city. So, for example, by looking at the state of Texas, in Texas, English is spoken at home by just over 68% of people. Of the people who speak another language, 86% speak Spanish, and it's only 1 or 2% for any other languages. So Spanish really is predominant language other than English in Texas. Now you can then compare that information to other states. For example, looking at the state of New York. In New York, a little over 72% of people speak English at home. Of the speakers of other languages, 49% speak Spanish, and then 8% speak Chinese, 6% speak Italian, and 4% speak Russian, and 4% speak French. So you can see that there are a lot of Spanish speakers in New York, but there are also other languages spoken, more so than in Texas. Okay, so there are different ways to look at this data. Let's talk about possible ways this information could be used or why it's important. I'd like to open this up for discussion. Do you have any ideas? Yes, in the front row. I think this could be important for educational purposes, so people know what kinds of classes might be needed in the schools and things like that. And I think it's also important to understand the cultural makeup of the United States. Yes, definitely. Anyone else? Yes? Isn't it also important to be aware of possible language change? If one language is being used less or more over time. Yes, absolutely. Okay, we are out of time, but we're going to talk about language change next week. So we'll discuss that more then. 7b. Our presentation today is on language change and language loss in the world. First, we talk about what situation is, and then we give some examples of programs being implemented. Alan, do you want to begin? Okay, first some background on the situation. There are actually differing views on how many languages exist in the world today. Most estimates that there are somewhere between 6,000 or 6,800 languages still in use. Now, it's hard to find exact estimate on how many, but some people believe that as many as half of the languages still in use could be lost by the end of century. Think of it, half the languages that exist. Here's a more specific example of how many languages are being lost. An article in the magazine Nature in 2003 stated that there are 46 different people around the world who are the last remaining speakers of their language. Wow, imagine that you were the only speaker of your language left. Yes, now one of the problems with all this is that it's very difficult to get complete agreement on actual language numbers, and then it's also hard to find agreement on the number of languages that are at risk of disappearing. One of the big reasons for this is that the criteria used are often very different. Let's look at an example. For instance, some researchers might consider language endangered if there are less than 10,000 speakers of it left, while other researchers might not consider language endangered until there are only 500 speakers left. The point is that different researchers have different ideas about when they might say that a language is really in danger of disappearing, so it's a problem. But for the most part, they all agree that languages are in fact disappearing. Oh, yes, that's true. And most agree that it's happening quite quickly. So then the question is, why is this important? Should we be concerned about language loss? Obviously, we might have differing opinions on this. Some people might say that it doesn't matter too much, that in fact, fewer languages could make it easier to communicate. Native American languages in North America are another example. There were once more than 250 languages spoken by Native Americans. Unfortunately, experts now estimate that there are only about 150 languages still in use, and even more unfortunate, experts think that very few of these are likely to exist in 60 years. But there are some interesting programs being used to try to keep some of the languages alive. Claudia, can you give some examples? Yes, one typical problem is that in many cases, the remaining speakers are elderly, so they're trying to take advantage of the older people's knowledge while they still can. They tape record the older people who can speak the language in order to have an audio record of the language. In some cases, they also might have a linguist work with the older people to get information about grammar and vocabulary. It's a little sad, but obviously having all that information recorded gives the possibility that they can still work on the language even after these remaining speakers are gone. Another way they can use the language that the elders have is by having the older people work in the children. They babysit or have with preschool and speaking the language. They are doing this with the Navajo language in Southwest. It's interesting because some places distance is a problem. Yes, and it's important to say that these kinds of programs are difficult and slow. In the end, they might not be enough. Yes, true. Are there any questions?